Comments and opinions expressed on Writers in Focus are those of the individual participants and are presented for the purpose of discussion only. No endorsements by Atlanta Fulton Public Library System or Fulton County government are intended, and none should be presumed. Hi, welcome to Writers in Focus. I'm your host, James Taylor, and today I'm delighted to have as my guest Mr. Drew Jubera. May I call you Drew?
Absolutely.
I'd like to welcome you to the Fulton County Government Center and the Atlanta Fulton Public Library. By way of introduction, Drew is an award-winning journalist who has written for the New York Times, the ESPN The Magazine, Esquire, Texas Monthly, and many other publications. For over a decade, I think more than a decade, you covered the South as the national desk reporter for the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. We're here to talk about Drew's book that caught me like a hook in the neck of my literary soul. It's called Must Win, A Season of Survival for a Town and Its Team. It's about the Valdosta Wildcats in their 2010 season. I'm going to hand you the ball in just about 15 seconds, okay? In 2009, you pitched a story to the New York Times about the Valdosta Wildcats, the most winningest high school football team in America. Right. You wrote the article, just another article in 2009 about a high school football team. That day, it was the most read or downloaded article in the New York Times. Right. You said, or your agent said, there's a book here. Do I have that right, Drew?
Pretty much. I mean, I knew then that this story had resonance far beyond, not only the South, but beyond football. And in the few days that I'd spent down in Valdosta reporting that story, I just knew there was so many layers and so many characters to get into, and that the next season was going to be this pivotal one for this team and this town and that school and the program. And a new coach would be coming in, and it just seemed like the timing was perfect for it.
We need some history. I'm a Yankee interloper. I've been living in the South for over 30 years. I was in graduate school at the University of Georgia when Herschel Walker was there, when the Dogs won the national championship with Buck Bellew, who was the quarterback from Valdosta.
That's right.
I had heard rumors all my life about this high school football program in Valdosta. Could you talk about the city of Valdosta? 50,000 people?
Now it's about 50,000.
In Lowndes County, right. And the tradition of Nick Hyder and Wright Bazemore.
Right. Well, football in Valdosta is almost like it's almost like another crop down there.
Oh.
I mean, it's been around that long. It's gone through a series. In fact, it is an agricultural area that went through, a boom in cotton, a boom in
naval
turpentine,
stores,
consequently also a boom in football players. I mean, this doesn't go back. Valdosta didn't just sort of have an era of a great team. It's sort of dominated the modern history of prep high school football.
And we're talking, let's be clear on this, we're talking about dominating America. I mean, the Valdosta Wildcats won 6 national high school titles.
That's right.
23 state championships.
That's right.
That's unheard of.
That's right.
Okay.
Right. And, they've won for so long, so many games for so long, they could lose every game for the next 65 straight years and still be above 500. Okay. Yeah. I mean, that's what they've done. By the time I got down there, it had been about a decade-long decline. And but football there had, they won their first state title in 1940, and the town then was about 25,000. Football was it. Valdosta is located in deepest South Georgia. It's about a dozen miles from the Florida line, surrounded by cotton fields, pines, and swamp.
Below the gnat line?
Far below the gnat line. About 2 hours. It's as far below the gnat line as you can get before you're in Florida.
Yeah.
It's a pretty little town. It's boomed to a degree over the last couple of decades, the way every place sort of has. But football has always sort of run along with it, and that's largely due to two really iconic coaches that were there from 1940 to about 1970, and then from 70s to the mid 90s, and that's Wright Bazemore and Nick Hyder, and they became two of the greatest high school football coaches in America. There was a 2-year gap between them. A coach was hired after Wright Bazemore retired after a national championship team. That coach went 17-3 over 2 seasons and was fired because those 3 losses were 2 more than Wright Bazemore had lost the previous 4 seasons. So they hired a guy from Rome, Georgia named Nick Hyder, and he came in and he lost his first, I don't know what it is, 5 or 6 games with Buck Bellew, a freshman quarterback there. Buck talked about on Saturday mornings after losses, both Nick Hyder and Buck would have for sale signs put in their front yards.
Yeah. It's hard. I've read the book, so I think it's hard for the audience to imagine how big football is and how big Bazemore and Hyder were. Bazemore coached for almost 30 years. He was the John Wayne, the Cary Grant, the Supreme Court Justice, the President of the United States, the Pope, all rolled into one. He said things like, during integration in 1954, the Supreme Court said we had to live together, but they didn't say how. When he brought together blacks and whites in Valdosta, I'm getting shivers just thinking about it. But I want to say one more thing, Drew. The book is not just about Valdosta and high school football. It's like saying that Seabiscuit, that wonderful book a few years ago, was about a racehorse, or The Orchid Thief was about someone in Florida who stole orchids. It's so well written. It's a study about the South, small towns, high school football, integration, blacks and whites living together. Okay, I get that off my chest. It's one of the best books I've read in a long time. I would recommend it to anybody. I was talking about Bazemore. Nick Hyder died in the Valdosta high school cafeteria.
Right.
Fell down and died of a heart attack. Right. When he was, I'll let you, folks, you can't imagine what football is in Valdosta. When he died, there was an open casket funeral held in the football stadium.
That's right.
With his open casket on the 50-yard line.
That's right.
I'm not making that up.
No. And
Okay.
the field was filled.
I get that out.
I mean, there were 8,000 people who showed up for this on a Sunday afternoon. It was 96 degrees, and there was Hyder with a football tucked under his left elbow.
Oh no!
Open casket at midfield. No, listen, those 2 coaches, I mean, you know, the history, I mean, I guess what makes this place unique is the history of that region, the South, and the history of football are just sort of run along parallel lines. I mean, it really is seen as when integration of those schools came in 1968, 69, you know, violence was breaking out all over the South.
Yeah.
It didn't there. Now, it wasn't perfect, but people talk about the football team as being the reason everyone cooled it. I mean, no one wanted to put that in jeopardy, and they moved along. You know, Wright Bazemore used to go to the all-black school before that happened and go to their practices, and he would tell those kids, we're all going to win a championship one day together. And the year after Bazemore came there, the year after integration came, they won it. And so they had that kind of power. Nick Hyder came in. He became almost this moral compass for the town. He was a preachifying coach. Yeah. He was, you know, on Sundays he would often go to small towns around Georgia and preach in those churches. He was an elder in the Baptist church there in Valdosta. Players talked about practices where he would start talking before practice, and at some point someone would have to come up to him and say, Coach, if we don't start practicing, we're going to run out of light. And so, you know, their presence was far beyond that football field. You know, preachers would call Bazemore when the schedule came out to find out when home games were, so they wouldn't schedule revivals and things like that. But when Hyder died in '96, fell dead in the cafeteria, and they had this huge funeral service, the town, it was almost like when Kennedy was shot. I mean, the town just felt they'd lost something special and really felt like they might never recover from it. They did win one championship 2 years later, but since then they've gone through 3 coaches. They haven't won anything since 1998, which is by far the longest drought. When Bazemore was there, they basically won state on a every other year basis.
Yeah.
So when Hyder died, there was this feeling that he may never be replaced. During that time, there was essentially white flight out to the county. Lowndes High School now has 1,000 more students than Valdosta does. They've won state 4 times since Valdosta last won it.
Which is incredible.
Right, and so everything has sort of shifted, and to the point where the big movement among the Chamber of Commerce and the movers and shakers in Valdosta was to have Valdosta give up its school charter and be merged with Lowndes County and have it become a part of that, which was finally sort of a wake-up call to a lot of people there that something needs to be done, not only for the schools themselves. Again, all these things are intertwined.
Yeah.
The football team became a huge part of that.
It's a story about the Valdosta Wildcats. It's a story about African American and white relations in a small town. It's a book about the South. It's a book about the most interesting people I've encountered in a long time. I forgot to mention, what were you doing as a friend of mine said, what were you doing in Valdosta for a year? You embedded yourself.
That's right.
For the season. You got to know the coach, Rance Gillespie.
Right.
You got to know one of my favorite characters, Nub. We'll talk about Nub in a minute. All these amazing people. Dashae March, Ryan Wilden, Malcolm Mitchell, who plays for the Dogs now.
Right.
Father and son, the Rome. The Romes, I should say.
Right.
Talk about, you're from Pennsylvania. Even though you've been in the South for a long time, I have to ask you, what was it like for a stranger, an interloper, such as I call myself one, to go to a real Southern town and spend almost a year there?
Right. Well,
Now your kids are here. Now they're my witness, and your wife is here too.
Well, partly, of course, it was different.
Yeah.
But these folks were so wide open for the most part.
Yeah.
That for me it was I walked into doors and walked into lives real easily there, and these folks after a while weren't strange one bit. I mean, and in fact, to me, what was sort of special about the place, as I say in the book, you sort of underestimate these folks at your own peril. They're sharp. They've had this institution down there for a long time, and they're rightly proud of it. And you be around it long enough, and you understand why it's there. I mean, these people take it seriously. Not only take their football seriously, but sort of cultivating everything about it, making sure it's run the way they want it to be run. They see it as a reflection of their town. They want to win, but they've always wanted to sort of win the right way. And that's just carried on for decades and decades and decades.
I want the audience to get a sense of what the book is about in this sense. When I'm reading the book, Rance Gillespie is hired as the new coach.
Right.
He's introduced to Valdosta. He said if he succeeds, he'll continue with his 6-figure salary. He might get a pickup truck, but he continues to drive his old Saturn.
Right.
He might get buried with the former coaches.
That's right.
He might get a house. Your wife will become the first lady of Valdosta. And when he starts winning, it's as if the whole town becomes transformed. I can see it as a movie. I mean, the book succeeds on every level possible, but on a movie I can see like everything just people coming out of their houses, we're winning again. That really happened, didn't it?
Right. No, I mean, Gillespie
I got carried away. Excuse me.
No. But Gillespie came in, and one of the things that he really appreciated about the place was that history. After Hyder died, after he fell dead in that cafeteria, it's almost like taking over for Notre Dame or Alabama or Green Bay and succeeding legendary coaches in those places. And a lot of the coaches that came in started pushing a lot of the traditions away. They felt constricted by it. They wanted to establish their own histories. And it really struck people the wrong way. These people are proud of what they've developed over the last now 100 years. Gillespie came in and did a really smart thing. He embraced all those traditions. Coaches who'd been around for decades, new coaches would come in and they would be shunted aside, fired, told not to really hang around anymore. Gillespie went up to all of them, gave them his card, said, "Here's my number, call me anytime." They had these traditions of, just the way they warmed up before a game. They have this great tradition, which didn't go away, of banging the tin when they come out, come out of their locker room onto the field, which is like thunder, coming up from the golf.
So many kids on the high school team that sometimes they had to play the
fight song
twice.
That's right. So Gillespie embraced all those things down to even to the point of the games had been changed to 7:30 on Friday nights. He came in, he switched it back to 8 o'clock. Why? That's when Valdosta plays football on Friday night.
And Drew, I've got to ask you this because the book is about race relations too. One of the great things about Rance Gillespie, not only is he the athletic director and football coach of the Valdosta Wildcats, he makes himself a father figure to the kids. There's one great chapter where one of his football players is homeless.
Right.
And I think Gillespie tells you, or one of the aides tells you, one of the coaches tells you that there are like maybe 100 homeless kids in the high school.
Right, or in the school
so
system.
one of his players is kicked out of a foster home
Right.
and has no place to stay.
Right.
Another man would have just picked up the phone and called Human Services. He gets up and drives over to the kid's house.
Right. He had his coaches. This was the night before the biggest game of the season with their arch rival.
When he's preparing, and
And it's the game that the previous coach had lost and was fired for losing 4 days later. After that practice, 7 o'clock that night before that game, there were coaches huddled around this kid. He had been kicked out the night before. An assistant coach had gone over to get him. He was staying with another player's family, but he'd left all his stuff there and was afraid to go back to get it. The father had called Gillespie, and Gillespie says threatened violence. So the kid needed to get his stuff. He had no clothes, no school books, anything that he had. So 3 coaches accompanied this kid back to his house. They stood in his front yard while he went inside. He came out with, this 17-year-old kid came out with 3 white plastic garbage bags that were filled with his life.
That's his life, yeah.
And put him in the truck, and off they went. And that's the kind of thing. It's not like that kind of thing happens every day, but variations of that happen almost every day.
But what does happen every day is this infusion of, call it contemporary urban hip-hop culture into a high school where, to me, I would least suspect it. Like down in South Georgia, this has got to be like a Mayberry RFD. It ain't. It's one of the most interesting epitomizations of that is when Dashe March makes this fabulous play on the field and he looks over to the sideline. This is high school. He's 16 or 17 and sees his girlfriend holding their baby, and that's normal.
Right, or it's not abnormal.
But that's what I'm trying to say.
Right. No. I mean, it is. Look,
kids don't have babies in high school. Yes, they do.
Right. Well, hip hop is the soundtrack to high school kids' lives now anywhere, and South Georgia is no different. Look, small towns are different than they used to be in the sense that the culture, America's culture is everywhere now. I mean,
good way to put it.
It's a click away on your iPhone. It's a channel away on your cable TV. It's just everywhere, and these kids are no different. But there is a part of Valdosta that's really poor. A third of the town lives under the poverty level. And a lot of these kids have those issues that you have in those kinds of situations.
One of my favorite chapters, it's not a chapter of the book, but it's a a theme that runs through the book are the royalty of Valdosta, the Rome father and son.
Right.
Stan Rome was one of the greatest athletes the South has ever produced, went on to a very productive NFL career,
Right.
and then succumbed to drugs and crack, came back to Valdosta, and at one time he used to like go up to a crack dealer, like try to consummate the deal, steal the crack and run away because he was such a great athlete.
Right.
And then one day a crack dealer shot him in the head with a .22, and now he hobbles around town on a cane,
Right.
but he walks into the locker room and inspires these kids.
Right.
And his son is now, his son plays for the Dogs now,
Right.
Jay Rome,
Right.
who's just 6'5", 260 pounds.
Right. Right.
Yeah, I mean, it's that kind of book. It gets me excited. What I want to disabuse the audience of the notion that this is a football book. It's not a sports story. It's a story about Valdosta. One of the questions I asked you before the interview was, what do you make of the notion of the fandom, where a high school team embodies the culture, the values, the heartbreak, the exaltation of a community? Is it good or bad?
Right. Well, you know,
I mean,
I guess it's good and bad.
Well, can I ask you what you're doing this Friday night? You're going down to Valdosta.
That's right. That's right. I am. Look, that kind of fandom exists everywhere.
I know.
We talked about it being a Georgia fan, being a Falcons fan.
Yeah.
But I mean, there is something. I don't know what the answer is, but there is something primal there. There is something. When you see these teams, we project something of ourselves on those teams. Now, in hope that they reflect it back. When you get down to the high school level, it's really far more personal than that. These kids. Those kids are walking down the street every day. You see them in the drugstore.
And you got to know them too, didn't you?
Right. And your kids play with those kids. So, that fandom, which also goes on for generations. I mean, for instance, there's a barbecue palace there called the Smokin' Pig, where the coach has his radio show every week on Wednesday nights, which people kind of complained about because it interferes with church services on Wednesdays. But that barbecue place is run by a gentleman whose last name is O'Neill. He is one of 21 O'Neills, 21 former Wildcats descended from an O'Neill. Now that goes back, to the 30s. I don't know if it goes back to the 20s. So when you have that kind of connection, when a town has that kind of connection to an institution for that many generations, that's why it's so, that's how you get that kind of fan base.
I know you've been asked this a million times, probably, but in 2009 you wrote that wonderful article about Valdosta for the New York Times. Subsequently, I should say, you embedded yourself in Valdosta for a year. You chronicled the 2010 season. What did you come away with after that season? Did you learn anything more than you did in 2009?
No, I mean, I guess some of it's kind of obvious, but it came through so loud and clear. I mean, one of those things was, you mentioned the coach. The connection those coaches have with those players was something I don't think I quite appreciated before I went down there.
He's also their savior, too, in many ways.
Right.
I'm not being sacrilegious, but
no.
But he takes it seriously.
Right.
Gillespie takes it seriously.
Absolutely. And so that came through loud and clear. I mean, not only did they put in a lot of hours, which they do, but those kids are looking for someone to give them something that they're not getting somewhere else. And Gillespie was, you ask those kids, he was the toughest coach they'd had in years, and they fell in love with the guy. He was the ultimate tough love kind of guy. I mean, he wasn't huggy, but at the same time, when things got tough, he was the guy who was there for them, and that's what they appreciated. They didn't want to hear words. They wanted to see it in action, and that's what he and his staff did for those
One
kids.
of your greatest characterizations is Rance Gillespie, because he's one of the people in life that he knows what to do. And it's, what am I saying? But he knew what to do to take care of these kids and to win, and I hope he wins on Friday night. I want to say hello to your wife, Ann, who's in the studio, to Frankie and Mary Louise. I want to say hello to Nub, who's going to watch this,
I'm sure.
show. Ladies and gentlemen, I've been talking to Drew Jubera. It's a book called Must Win, A Season of Survival for a Town and Its Team. In closing, where do you think Valdosta is going to go? Very, very, very briefly. Is this something that is booming in America, waning, this football hysteria?
Right. Well, I think in Valdosta, where it appears to have gotten back to is here is an institution that people thought was going to fade away, something that they related to, that they saw themselves in, and were worried it was going to disappear. It's sort of like having a landmark in a city disappear.
Wow.
And for them, that's how they felt about this team. And at least for now, those folks can again feel pride in that institution, and so again feel pride in where they live.
I wish you the greatest success for this book, Must Win. Ladies and gentlemen, it's a must read. To the folks in Valdosta, go Wildcats.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
You bet.
Thank you. Comments and opinions expressed on Writers in Focus are those of the individual participants and are presented for the purpose of discussion only. No endorsements by Atlanta Fulton Public Library System or Fulton County government are intended, and none should be presumed.